Okay, so in this video we're going to be looking at functions and procedures. So let's take a little look at what Cambridge expects us to be able to do in the exam. So number one, they want us to be able to understand what is meant by procedure, function and parameters. Okay, so we'll be looking at each of those as we're walking through this video. Number two, they want us to be able to define and use parameters, procedures and functions with or without parameters. Okay, so they don't always need to have parameters. And number three, we need to be able to understand and use local and global variables. All right, so when we're talking about procedures and functions and parameters inside of the procedures and functions, we can have up to two of a maximum. Okay, so in reality you can have more than two, but as far as Cambridge are concerned, they will only expect you to be able to have two parameters. Okay, so you might have 0, you might have 1, or you might have 2, no more than that. Okay, so let's make a start. So let's start off with looking at subroutines and just a little explanation of what they are. So subroutines are blocks of code which perform specific tasks. All right, now if you write a block of code that can perform a specific task and then you need that several times, or you need it multiple times throughout a program, you can just call upon that subroutine over and over again rather than rewriting it. All right, so they're really, really good because they save you a lot of time coding. All right, and if you can save time coding and save time writing lines of code, it means you're also saving memory. Okay, because you don't have to store all of those lines of code, you only have to store them once and then call upon it. So the advantage of using subroutines is that you can reuse the code. All right, and it saves you time. And it also makes your program simpler and easier to understand because there's not lots and lots of lines of repeated code. You just have it once and it makes it nice and blocked and sectioned off, and it looks really neat and tidy and easier to use. So now we looked at subroutines, let's have a look at what functions and procedures are. Okay, so they're both different types of subroutines and they're actually really, really similar to each other. Alright, and sometimes you might see people writing a procedure and calling it a function because they are very, very similar, and we're going to look at the very slight difference in a second. Okay, now the main difference is, or the pretty much only difference is, that a function performs a task and returns a value, and a procedure performs a task and doesn't return a value. Right, now if that's a little bit unsure, if you're a little bit unsure what that means, if we have a look at this, we've got two examples here, a very simple function and a very simple procedure. Right, so in Python, you declare a function by using the word def, and you declare a procedure by using the word def. Exactly the same. You give it the name, and it can be any name, as long as it's not a keyword in Python, so you couldn't call it print or if or while or something like that. And then inside the brackets, you put the parameters. Right, if there's no parameters, you just open and close the brackets and leave them blank. Now you can see here that at the bottom of the function it says return answer, and at the bottom of the procedure it says print answer. Apart from that, they're identical. All right, now what this means is that I can reuse this variable answer in other procedures and other functions in my code. In the procedure, because it's not returned, I can only use it in this procedure here. All right, now this is because these variables are what are called local variables. That means they're localized within the code, and if I want to use them out of the code, out of the function or out of the procedure, I need to return it. All right, so let's have a closer look at the difference between variables, local variables and global variables. All right, so local and global variables are declared inside of a subroutine. That means that they're running and they're being assigned inside of a function like here above. All right, now if you want to use them outside of the function, you have to return them back into the code like I just talked about. And a global variable is a variable that is defined and assigned outside of a function, and it can be used anywhere within your program. Okay, so it's not it's not defined within the function or the procedure. Okay, it's not in the side of the indented code. It's above it or below it, and it can be called anywhere. Okay, now just a side note, when we're talking about this, actually I will talk about it in a second because I'm not actually there yet. Now this is an example of a procedure. Right, now you can see here, you can see I've defined it up here, I've declared it up here, and it's a big long passage of writing that actually goes off the page there. Now if I want to use this over and over again, I can just put it into a simple little procedure here, and then when I want to call it again, rather than retyping it all like that, I can just call upon it using that, and it saves me lots of time writing. It looks a lot neater, and it saves me all of these lines of code, especially if I'm using it a lot. So that's a fair bit of memory saving as well. All right. So this is how, in Python, we might use functions and procedures together. So if you look here, the first one I've got, you can see it's a function because it returns an integer back into the code. And this is really simple. I'm just setting a variable, I'm calling it username, and I'm letting the user input their name into it. And then I'm returning it, so this variable can be called upon later on outside of the function. Then I have a procedure here, and I've called a print message, and you can see this is taking a parameter here of username. And it's the whole point of this procedure is to print hello and then give the name of the user. And then finally I've created another procedure at the bottom here that is going to pull it all together and make it all work. So just a side note here, just before I start talking about this, these variables, although I've kept them the same names here and here, they don't necessarily have to be the same name. It would work fine if I called this something else, but it just makes sense to me to have it the same name so we can see what we're referring to. So I've created a variable and I've called it username, and I've made it equal to getName. Now this getName, you can see here, it's got an open and close brackets. This is this function. So I'm calling upon this function. So then when this line of code runs, it actually opens up this function here and runs this code. And then when the user inputs their name, because it saves it here and this is returned back into the code, it can then be saved into this variable here. Okay, then once this is ran and it's saved, I open and run the print message procedure, and you can see because there's this parameter inside, I've put the parameter inside here. All right, now this parameter is this variable here. So this variable is running this function which gets the user's input and saves it into here, and then I'm running the print message procedure and putting the variable inside of it, which will be the user's name. All right, now when you are creating a function or a function or procedure, sorry, the things in the brackets are called parameters. When you are calling a function or procedure, the things in the brackets are called arguments. Right, so if we have a look here, in this case, we have our parameters here, and it's just saying that you need something to store the username. That's all it's saying. Okay, but when I'm running it and I'm getting the argument, I'm not actually saying, oh, I need something for the username. I'm actually giving the username. All right, because somebody has typed in their username here and it's saved into here, and then I've ran it and saved it into here. And then inside here for the argument, it is saying that it's an actual tangible name. It's not just saying, oh, you need to put something in there. All right, now that is the difference between an argument and a procedure. So if I had parameters saying I needed a number 1 and a number 2 because I wanted to add them together, that would be parameters because I'm saying I need a number 1 and a number 2. but the actual numbers 24 and 6 that I'm going to add together, they are arguments. Okay, so let's load up some code and we'll have a look at some simple examples of it. All right, so I'm just going to load up idle, and don't worry about that, that's one of your 15 mark questions. I will start a new one and take this time. Just quickly save it and we'll call it function practice. I'll save that. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to declare or create my function. Okay, so def keyword in Python to create, and I'm going to call it, let's see, add numbers, and then open and close brackets. Right, so at the moment this is an add numbers and it doesn't have any parameters in there. I'm going to say I wanted to add two numbers together, so let's go num1 and then comma num2. Okay, so we've got two parameters in there and they're separated by a comma. Then when I press return, you'll see everything is indented because this is all going to be the function code. So I'm just going to say the answer is equal to, and then we'll just say num1 plus num2. Okay, and then we're going to leave that there like that. We're going to come out of the function, and then I'm going to go, let's try and do this. We'll go number 1 equals 12. We can say number 2 equals 34. Random numbers, doesn't really matter. Then I can say, let's say print, and then say add numbers, and then here these are going to be the arguments. So I'm going to have number 1 and number 2. And now let's see what this does, because you can see let's close all my brackets. I've got my variables here these are global variables, okay, because they can be used anywhere. They're outside of the function, and I've got a local variable here inside of the procedure that shouldn't be able to be ran outside of the procedure. So let's run it and see what happens. So if I run it here, and you can see straight away I'm getting a problem and it's saying none. All right, it's not even giving me 0, it's not giving me an error, it's just saying none. Now this is because if you look here, okay, I've created my answer and I've said it's equal to number 1 plus number 2, and I've ran the procedure here because it is a procedure at the moment, because I haven't returned this code. So I haven't returned this variable. So at the moment it is a procedure because it's not returning anything. So all I need to do is return answer. Now if I run this, you'll see it just gives me my answer. Okay, so you can see here, very simple version of a function that is going to take two parameters, and then I'm going to call upon that function and add these two numbers together. Okay, now you can add more functionality to it. I could say, instead of being equal to something I've set, I could say int input, and then just say, let's see, enter a number, and then close both of those. And then I could do the same for, just copy and paste for speed here, do the same for this one. And now if I run this, it's going to give me the choice to enter my number. So I can say 45 and then 77, and it's going to run the function that I've got and give me the answer. 45 and 77 add together, 122. Okay, so I'll leave this one here for now, and I'll make another video with some functions that are a little bit more complex. For now, I think that's a good place to stop. I'll see you in the next video.